Hello everyone and welcome back to Mr. Scarer. Today I want to share with you 9 of the most unsettling true horror stories that have emerged from the arid deserts and eerie mountains of Arizona. In this episode, we will delve into the darker aspects of the Grand Canyon State. From forsaken mining towns where lost souls linger, to remote desert roads where unimaginable things wander under the stars, and locations marked by evil so profoundly that time itself cannot erase it. Each story has been carefully researched and pieced together from first-hand accounts, police records, historical documents, and testimonies from brave survivors who shared their experiences to honor the victims and their families. While some names and minor details may be altered for privacy, the essence of the events remains intact as reported. These tales are not folklore or myths. They are genuine experiences that happened to real individuals in real locations you can still visit today. If you're new here, I encourage you to subscribe to Fear Files for daily true horror content that might leave you pondering what lurks in the shadows of the American Southwest. Don't forget to hit that notification bell so you won't miss when darkness beckons. Now let's begin our first story from the ghost town of Jerome, where an ancient presence watches from the mountains. I grew up in Jerome, Arizona, precariously perched on Cleopatra Hill in the Verde Valley, at an elevation of 5,200 feet. We are often referred to as America's most haunted ghost town. With fewer than 500 residents year-round, the ghostly aspect feels more real than many care to admit. The entire town is situated on a steep 30-degree slope, and when you gaze down Main Street, you can see the skeletal remains of the old mining operation sprawling across the hillside like the bones of a giant, long-dead creature. Jerome was once known as the wickedest town in the West, and between 1876 and 1953, the United Verde mine produced over 1 billion worth of copper, gold, and silver, but it also produced something far more sinister: death. Numerous mining accidents claimed countless lives over the decades, and the town itself was nearly destroyed twice by fires that swept through the wooden structures like the wrath of an angry god. The Jerome Grand Hotel stands at the highest point of the town, a massive white concrete structure that dominates the skyline. Yet it wasn't always a hotel. From 1927 until 1950, it served as the United Verde Hospital, built to care for the endless stream of injured and dying miners pulled from the depths below. The hospital had 5 floors, and its basement housed a morgue where bodies were kept before burial. On January 17, 1935, a maintenance man named Claude Harvey was working on the elevator shaft when tragedy struck. The elevator descended unexpectedly while he was still inside, crushing him to death. His body was found hours later, mangled beyond recognition. They say his blood stained the concrete so deeply that no amount of scrubbing could ever fully erase it. When the hospital closed in 1950 and lay abandoned for decades, reports of strange occurrences began to surface: elevator doors opening and closing on their own, footsteps echoing in empty hallways, the smell of copper and blood lingering in the basement, and most haunting of all, the figure of a man in work clothes seen inside the elevator shaft, perpetually searching for something he had lost. My mother worked as a housekeeper at the Jerome Grand Hotel after it was converted into a hotel in 1996. She had her own experiences with what she referred to as the hotel's residents, though she was never comfortable discussing them in detail. There was one rule she was adamant about, and she made me promise to adhere to it if I ever worked there: never go down to the old basement morgue alone, especially at night. She never explained why exactly, only saying that Claude Harvey was still searching for something down there, and if disturbed, he might decide to follow you home. At the time, I thought it was just a story to deter me from sneaking around the hotel during my visits to see her. I regret not heeding her warning. When I turned 17, I needed a job to save for college, and the Jerome Grand Hotel was hiring servers and bartenders for the restaurant. With my mother helping me secure an interview, I began working there in the summer of 2009, primarily during evening shifts, serving tourists who ventured up the mountain to experience the haunted hotel and enjoy the breathtaking views of the Verde Valley below. Initially, the job was fine. Tourists delighted in hearing ghost stories, and I became skilled at sharing them. I would recount Claude Harvey's tragic death in graphic detail, along with tales of other spirits said to haunt the building, the woman in white seen on the third floor, phantom surgery sounds echoing from rooms that had once been operating theaters, and the sound of a child's laughter in the hallways late at night, despite no children being guests. I shared these stories countless times, never truly believing them. Just a form of entertainment to earn larger tips from thrill-seeking tourists who desired a safe scare. However, as I spent more time there, inexplicable events began to occur. Keys would be found in locks I knew I hadn't touched. I'd hear footsteps behind me in empty hallways only to turn around and find no one there. The elevator seemed to malfunction frequently, stopping between floors for no apparent reason or opening its doors without anyone having called it. Other staff members openly discussed their experiences, treating them as just quirks of working in an old building. My co-worker Kendricks, who had been there for 3 years, shared that she saw shadowy figures at least once a week, particularly in the basement where the old morgue was located, the very place where they prepared the bodies of deceased miners before returning them to their families, where Claude Harvey's blood had seeped into the floor, and where my mother warned me never to go alone. I managed to avoid the basement for nearly 6 months. My duties never required me to go down there, and I was perfectly content keeping it that way. However, in December of that year, everything changed. It was a slow Tuesday night, and once we finished cleaning up after the last dinner service, Kendricks and I were the only staff left in the building, aside from the night manager busy with paperwork in the office. Kendricks looked at me with a playful grin and said she wanted to show me something in the basement. She mentioned a room down there that still had old medical equipment left behind when the hospital closed, calling it creepy and saying I would appreciate it since I was always telling ghost stories to the tourists. I hesitated, recalling my mother's warning, but Kendricks laughed and called me a chicken. At 17, I was foolish and didn't want to appear scared in front of my coworker, so I agreed to go. We took the elevator down to the basement level, the doors opening with a groan, and immediately the temperature dropped significantly. The basement hallways were unrenovated, retaining the original industrial paint on the walls, which was faded and peeling. The lighting was poor, with just a few bare bulbs hanging from the ceiling every 20 feet or so, casting long shadows between pools of dim yellow light. The smell hit me right away. Copper, mold, and something beneath it all, something rotten and ancient. Kendricks led me down the hallway, passing several locked doors until we reached a room at the end. She pushed the door open, revealing old gurneys, rusted metal cabinets, and what appeared to be an ancient embalming table against one wall. "This is where they prepared the bodies," Kendricks said quietly. "This is where Claude Harvey ended up after they pulled him out of the elevator shaft." I stared at the embalming table, feeling my stomach churn. The metal surface was stained with dark patches that could have been rust, yet somehow I knew they weren't. We spent maybe 5 minutes in that room before Kendricks's radio crackled to life. It was the night manager asking her to return upstairs to help with something. She told me she had to go and would be right back, suggesting I wait there or explore a bit if I wanted. After she left, I heard her footsteps echoing down the hallway, fading until the basement was silent. I should have left with her. I should have followed her back to the elevator and not looked back. But instead I walked further into the room, examining the old medical equipment. I noticed glass jars on a shelf with faded handwritten labels, formaldehyde, phenol, alcohol. As I read the labels, I heard it. Footsteps in the hallway, slow, heavy footsteps approaching the room. I froze. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. I turned slowly and saw him standing in the doorway. A man in work clothes, dark pants, and a dark shirt stained with something wet in the dim light. His face was obscured, but I could feel his gaze fixed directly on me. Not on the room, not on the equipment, but on me. I opened my mouth to speak, but no sound escaped. The figure took a step into the room, and that's when I saw his hands, mangled, fingers bent at unnatural angles, skin torn and hanging in strips, precisely the kind of injuries someone would sustain if crushed by an elevator. I ran, I pushed past him or through him. I still can't be sure and felt a bone-chilling cold that burned my skin. I sprinted down that hallway faster than I had ever run, not stopping until I reached the elevator and slammed my hand on the button to return upstairs. As the doors closed and the elevator ascended, I glanced down through the gap, seeing him stand at the end of the hallway watching me leave. When I returned upstairs, Kendricks asked why I looked so pale. I told her I wasn't feeling well and needed to go home. I left my shift early that night, driving the 45 miles back to my family's house in Cottonwood, my hands trembling so badly I could barely grasp the steering wheel. That should have been the end of it, but it wasn't. 3 days later, I woke in the middle of the night to footsteps in the hallway outside my bedroom. Slow, heavy footsteps. I lived in a single-story house with my bedroom at the end of a long hallway. The footsteps went back and forth, as if someone were pacing, searching. I got out of bed and opened my door to find the hallway empty. Yet I could smell it, the copper and rot from the basement. This occurred again the next night and the night after that. My mother noticed my sleeplessness, and when I finally recounted my basement experience at the Jerome Grand Hotel, her face went pale. She informed me I had disturbed Claude Harvey, who sometimes followed people who intruded on his domain while he searched. She asked if I had touched anything in that room. I admitted I had picked up one of the glass jars to read its label. She closed her eyes and shook her head, saying, "You took his attention. Now he believes you can help him find what he lost." Over the next 2 weeks, the activity in my house escalated. Objects would shift on their own. I heard breathing behind me when no one was there. My younger brother began having nightmares about a man with broken hands standing at the foot of his bed. My mother eventually contacted someone she knew, a woman from Sedona who specialized in spiritual cleansing. The woman arrived at our home and performed a ritual involving burning sage and speaking words in a language I couldn't recognize. She explained that the spirit was tethered to an object, something it had lost in death, and was desperately trying to reclaim it. The only way to bring it to rest was to return to the place where it died and help it find peace. My mother refused to let me return to Jerome, but the disturbances persisted and worsened. Finally, 3 weeks after my basement ordeal, I drove back to Jerome alone. I approached the hotel and found the night manager, telling him I needed to visit the basement one last time. He regarded me strangely but handed me the key. I returned to that room at the end of the hall, the embalming room, and stood there in the dim light speaking aloud. I expressed my apologies to Claude Harvey for disturbing him, admitting I didn't know what he was searching for but hoped he could find peace. I stood there in silence for nearly 10 minutes. Then, on the floor near the embalming table, I noticed something I had previously overlooked, a small metal object partially hidden beneath the table. I picked it up. It was a wedding ring, tarnished and bent with the initials CH and a date engraved inside, June 5, 1934, less than a year before Claude Harvey died in the elevator shaft. I placed the ring on the embalming table for him to see and then left. That night, the disturbances in my house ceased completely. I never experienced anything paranormal again, but I also never returned to the Jerome Grand Hotel. I quit my job the next day over the phone, and my mother understood. Years later, I learned that maintenance workers at the hotel discovered a wedding ring in the old morgue during renovations. They placed it in a display case in the lobby, labeled as an artifact from the hospital era. Claude Harvey had finally found what he had been seeking, but it took my uncovering it from the shadows for him to see it. I often reflect on this, what it means to be so attached to something that you can't let go even in death, and what it signifies to search for decades for something that was right in front of you all along, merely hidden in darkness. Jerome continues to be regarded as the most haunted town in America, and the Jerome Grand Hotel still conducts ghost tours for curious visitors. However, I will never return. Some places hold on to their dead too tightly, and some of the dead hold on in return. In 2019, my girlfriend Jana and I embarked on a drive from Tucson to Phoenix along Interstate 10. On a whim, we decided to take a detour to Casa Grande Mountain right after sunset. By that time, we had been dating for about 8 months and had developed a shared passion for exploring unusual and allegedly haunted spots throughout Arizona during our free time. Jana, an anthropology student at the University of Arizona, had a keen interest in unexplained phenomena and folklore. Unlike many, she approached the paranormal with a scientific lens, seeking evidence and understanding. I had a more open mindset, believing that some experiences might transcend scientific explanation. Regardless, I cherished our adventures together. Casa Grande Mountain had intrigued us for months. It stood isolated in Pinal County, roughly halfway between Tucson and Phoenix, rising dramatically from the flat desert like a giant's fist. The mountain was known for various strange occurrences, particularly a phenomenon locals dubbed the Black Mist. This mist, as described, was a dark vapor that manifested near the mountain at night, always black or a deep gray, moving in ways that natural fog does not. Jana had gathered stories from online forums and local historians, revealing that the mist did not simply dissipate, but flowed with intent, as if alive. Encounters with it left people feeling observed or even completely engulfed, with reports of vivid hallucinations, time distortions, and intense dread. Some individuals claimed to have lost hours of their lives with no remembrance of what transpired, while others described seeing unsettling shapes and figures within the mist. Despite numerous investigations by paranormal researchers and atmospheric scientists, no one could explain its origins or why it was confined to Casa Grande Mountain. Jana believed there was a logical explanation involving temperature inversions and mineral deposits, creating peculiar air currents. I was less certain, yet we both wanted to experience it firsthand. We exited the interstate around 7:30 p.m. and took the back roads toward the mountain. It was late September, and the desert still felt the oppressive heat of summer. Even as the sun set, the temperature lingered in the low 90s. We parked at a dirt pullout about half a mile from Casa Grande Mountain's base and stepped out of the car. The scenery was quintessential Sonoran desert, adorned with saguaros and creosote bushes on rocky soil that crunched beneath our feet. The mountain loomed before us, dark against the deepening purple sky. Jana carried her good digital camera equipped for night vision and a handheld EMF meter borrowed from a friend who dabbled in paranormal investigations. Though I thought the EMF meter was excessive, Jana insisted it might detect electromagnetic fluctuations if the mist were some atmospheric plasma phenomenon. We set up our equipment on level ground with a clear view of the mountain and waited. For the first hour, nothing happened. The sun dipped below the horizon, allowing the stars to emerge, thousands twinkling brightly in the clear desert sky far from city lights. We sat on my car's hood, discussing our studies, careers, and future aspirations. Jana hoped to pursue graduate research on indigenous folklore intertwined with unexplained phenomena. I was working as a graphic designer, still pondering if it was my true calling. It felt like an ordinary evening. Coyotes howled in the distance, insects buzzed among the brush, and the occasional rustle of small creatures stirred in the creosote. The atmosphere was peaceful and safe. I remember thinking we might be wasting our time, that the Black Mist was merely an urban legend perpetuated by internet forums and gullible tourists. Then at 9:15 everything shifted. The desert fell into an eerie silence, a complete stillness as if someone had flipped a switch. Jana noticed it simultaneously with me, sitting up straight and instinctively reaching for the EMF meter. That's when we saw it. The mist emerged from the mountain's base, not gradually like fog, but as a solid dark mass in the starlight. It was black, truly black, reminiscent of oil smoke or ink in water. It surged toward us with a chilling, deliberate flow. Jana grabbed her camera, her scientific curiosity momentarily overshadowing any sense of danger. Meanwhile, the EMF meter shrieked. the needle pinned to the far right, signaling electromagnetic fields that shouldn't exist in the desolate desert. I stood up transfixed as the mist approached with an unsettling speed. As it neared, I noticed it wasn't uniform. There were darker patches within it, areas of profound black moving independently like shadows within shadows. Jana continued to photograph, muttering observations, entirely focused on documenting the moment. Then the mist reached her, flowing around her legs, rising like water filling a container. She stopped speaking, lowering her camera and staring blankly. I called her name, but she didn't respond. The mist climbed her body, encircling her torso, arms, and neck. I rushed to her, grabbing her arm in an attempt to pull her away. But the moment I touched the mist, it consumed me too. A bone-chilling cold enveloped me. Not the winter air or ice, but an absence of warmth, as if all heat was siphoned from my body. My lungs felt constricted and breathing became impossible. Then I was no longer in the desert. I was in a vast empty darkness. I couldn't see, hear, or feel the ground beneath my feet. Suspended in nothingness, yet I knew without a doubt I was not alone. Entities lurked in the shadows, unseen but palpably present, observing, waiting. Then the visions began. A flood of imagery depicting people perishing in the desert. Not recent deaths, but historical ones. I witnessed Spanish conquistadors suffering in the sweltering heat, their armor scorching their flesh, dying of thirst with swollen, blackened tongues. I saw indigenous people fleeing from an unseen terror, fear etched on their faces as they fell in the sand, never to rise. Miners in the 1800s caught in a flash flood, drowning in the rapidly rising muddy waters. A family in a covered wagon deceased from disease, their bodies abandoned to decay, as no one remained to bury them. I saw a woman running through the night, glancing back at an unseen pursuer. Then I witnessed her fall and the entity that caught her, something not human, with too many limbs and predatory eyes reflecting light like an animal's. The visions cascaded faster and faster, overlapping in a torrent of death, fear, and anguish spanning centuries. This desert was a graveyard, this mountain a tribute to every soul lost in its shadow. The black mist was a keeper of their memories, a chronicler of their final moments. In that instant I understood. The mist wasn't merely a natural phenomenon, nor a supernatural one in the conventional sense. It was something ancient, residing in the liminal spaces between life and death, feeding on trauma, growing stronger with every tragedy that unfolded within its realm. I couldn't tell how long I remained in that state. It could have been mere seconds or hours. Time held no meaning in that darkness. Eventually I felt solid ground beneath me again and heard sounds returning. The hum of insects, the gentle rustle of wind through dry grass. When I opened my eyes, I was on my hands and knees in the dirt beside my car. The mist had vanished. The desert returned to normal. The stars shining brightly above. The mountain a dark silhouette in the distance. I frantically searched for Jana. She was about 10 feet away, leaning against a rock, arms wrapped around her knees, staring blankly. I crawled closer, placing my hand on her shoulder. She flinched away from me. Calling her name again, she finally looked at me, but her eyes seemed different. Not physically, but something vital was missing, a spark or warmth that had always been there. She stood up silently and walked to the car. I followed, my legs trembling, barely able to support me. We got into the car and I drove us back to the interstate in silence. We left the camera and EMF meter behind in the dirt. When I dropped Jana off at her apartment, she exited the car without a glance. I asked if she was okay and she simply said she was fine. When I inquired about what she had seen in the mist, she firmly stated she didn't want to discuss it ever again. I insisted we should talk about our experience, that we needed to process it together, but she told me to go home. I didn't hear from her for 3 days. When she finally called, her voice felt flat and distant. She expressed a need for space, stating that what happened at Casa Grande Mountain had changed something within her, and she needed time to understand its significance. I tried to encourage her to talk, to allow me to help, but she remained unresponsive. 2 weeks later, she ended our relationship via text message. No explanation, no closure. just a simple statement that she couldn't continue in the relationship. I reached out multiple times afterward, but she blocked my number and cut me off on all social media platforms. I drove to her apartment once only to find her roommate informed me that she had moved out without leaving a forwarding address. For a long time I struggled to comprehend what had transpired. I thought perhaps she witnessed something in the mist that traumatized her to the point of avoiding anyone who shared that experience. I even wondered if she blamed me for suggesting the trip to Casa Grande Mountain, despite it being her idea. Eventually I realized it was something deeper. Whatever Jana encountered in that darkness, whatever visions the mist unveiled to her, fundamentally altered her perception of reality. She had sought scientific explanations for the unexplained, only to confront the undeniable truth that some experiences elude rationality and understanding. That knowledge fractured something within her. She couldn't be with me because I represented the moment her worldview shattered. A tangible reminder that what we experienced was real, not merely a hallucination or dream. I still endure nightmares of the black mist, those visions of death in the desert, centuries of anguish compressed into fleeting moments. In the aftermath, I extensively researched Casa Grande Mountain, hoping to uncover explanations for our encounter. I found numerous accounts from others who encountered the mist, many describing similar visions and relationships that fractured afterward. Many reported irreversible psychological changes, a lingering sense of having witnessed something never meant to be seen. Some claimed they still perceived the mist even from hundreds of miles away. I have glimpsed it too, fleeting glimpses of black fog and dark alleys, shadows shifting oddly in my peripheral vision. I can't tell if they are real or products of my mind replaying the trauma endlessly, but I know I will never return to Casa Grande Mountain. Some mysteries are destined to remain unsolved, and I believe Jana exists somewhere out there, shouldering the same burden I carry, witnessing the same sights I see, yet choosing solitude over sharing this understanding. I hope she has found peace. I hope the mist has released her. But deep down I doubt it works that way. Once it touches you, once it reveals what it harbors in the darkness, you become part of its collection. Another memory, another ghost in the desert. The most difficult shift of my career took place on a Tuesday night in October 1978. At the Arizona State Prison Complex in Florence, a location that has witnessed over 100 executions since 1910. Florence is a small town situated about 60 miles southeast of Phoenix, enveloped by vast deserts, cotton fields, and correctional facilities. With a population of around 25,000, nearly half of the residents are employed in the prison system. It's a community where high school football games draw crowds on Friday nights and church services fill Sundays. However, beneath this facade of small-town normalcy lies one of the most infamous prisons in the American Southwest. The death row unit at Florence has held some of the most dangerous criminals in Arizona's history, and I spent 5 years of my life working as a corrections officer there. I thought I had witnessed the extent of human cruelty, but I was mistaken. I began my time at Florence in 1974, shortly after I left the Army. At just 23 years old, I needed a job that offered decent pay, and corrections work seemed to fit the bill. While the pay wasn't exceptional, it was reliable and there were always openings due to a high turnover rate. Many struggled with the psychological burden of working in a place where men awaited their fate in cells, where violence could erupt at any moment, and where the very atmosphere felt thick with anger and despair. But I learned to cope. I became adept at maintaining a neutral expression, a calm tone, and deliberate movements. I identified which inmates required close monitoring and which ones posed no threat. I adapted to the prison's rhythms and routines that kept everything functioning smoothly. I also learned to leave the darkness of the job behind at the end of each shift. For 4 years, this approach served me well. Then I met Dion. Dion arrived on death row in August 1978, convicted of murdering a convenience store clerk during a robbery in Phoenix. The clerk was a 22-year-old college student working nights to support his tuition, tragically shot 3 times at close range. The case garnered significant media attention due to its brutal and senseless nature. The prosecution argued that Dion shot the clerk even after receiving all the money in the register, framing it as an execution-style killing fueled solely by cruelty. Dion was sentenced to death by lethal injection and was transferred to Florence to await his execution date. Upon his arrival, I was assigned to his cell block as one of the primary guards. I recall the first time I laid eyes on him. He was a tall man, over 6 feet, with arms adorned in prison tattoos and a face that bore the scars of too much violence for someone just 28 years old. Yet what struck me most were his eyes. They did not reflect those of a cold-blooded killer, but rather the fear of someone who was terrified. Over the next 2 months, I interacted with Dion almost daily. I served him meals, escorted him to showers, and supervised his recreation time in the yard. During our conversations, he maintained his innocence, insisting he had not killed the college student and that the police had apprehended the wrong man. He claimed the real killer was still at large. I had heard similar stories before. Every inmate on death row insists they are innocent as a psychological defense mechanism against the reality of their actions and impending fate, so I didn't believe him. I listened and nodded, as that was part of my job, but his words felt hollow. Yet Dion was persistent, detailing how the real killer had knowledge of the store's layout, how he had cased it beforehand, and how a witness had spotted another man fleeing the scene, a witness who had never been called to testify. He revealed that his public defender had hardly investigated his case, barely mounting a defense. Most troubling of all was his suggestion that one of the corrections officers at Florence was aware of the truth, but refused to disclose which one. He believed someone in the system was ensuring the truth remained concealed. Though I remained skeptical, something about his manner troubled me. The specifics of his claims stood out from the usual desperate denials I encountered. Additionally, Dion carried an unusual calmness. Most death row inmates oscillate between anger and despair, but Dion seemed focused, channeling his energy into problem-solving instead of resigning himself to fate. It unsettled me in an inexplicable way. My coworker Kaylin noticed it too. Having worked at Florence for 7 years, longer than anyone else on our shift, she had developed an instinct for reading inmates. One evening during our dinner break, she remarked that Dion was different. She noted how most inmates ultimately surrendered to their fates, retreating into silence, while Dion was becoming increasingly active and insistent. She felt as though he was building toward something significant. When I inquired about what she thought he might do, she could only shake her head, expressing uncertainty but emphasizing the need to monitor him closely. She was correct. On October 17, 1978, I began my evening shift at 6 p.m. and everything seemed normal. The death row unit was quiet. Most inmates were either reading or resting in their cells. Kaylin and I conducted our rounds, ensuring everything was secure. I saw Dion sitting on his bunk writing a letter, and we exchanged nods. Nothing appeared out of the ordinary. At 8:30, Kaylin and I were stationed at the control desk at the end of the cell block with 2 other officers on duty, each conducting rounds in different sections. The radio was silent and everything felt routine. Then at 8:47, the radio crackled with 3 words that sent chills down my spine. Officer down, DB block. Kaylin and I hurriedly grabbed our equipment and ran. DB block housed the most violent inmates, those who had harmed other prisoners or attacked guards. It was only 2 corridors away, yet it felt like a vast distance. Upon arrival, I saw Officer Daniels on the ground, bleeding from a head wound. Officer Martinez leaned against the wall, conscious but disoriented, and I noticed that Dion's cell door was ajar. Not unlocked, simply open. Someone had used a key to release him from the outside. Kaylin immediately called for backup and medical assistance while I checked on Daniels and Martinez. Daniels had been struck from behind with a heavy object, perhaps a radio or baton. Martinez explained he was escorting Dion back from the shower when someone ambushed him, someone wearing a corrections officer uniform. By the time he realized what was happening, Dion had vanished and the assailant had fled. The prison went into immediate lockdown. All inmates were secured in their cells and every corridor was sealed. Every available officer was dispatched to search the facility. We located Dion 30 minutes later in the execution chamber, where lethal injections were administered. He was seated in the chair designated for condemned prisoners' final moments, holding a manila envelope. When we entered, weapons drawn, he raised his hand slowly, insisting he was unarmed and needed us to listen. He claimed he had proof. The senior officer instructed Dion to place the envelope on the ground and lie down, but Dion refused. He cautioned that if we took the envelope without examining its contents, it would vanish like all the other evidence had. He named Officer Richard Haynes, a respected senior corrections officer at Florence who had worked there for 12 years, as the individual who had committed the murder of the college student. He accused Haynes of having a gambling problem and robbing businesses to settle his debts. Dion asserted that he had proof in the envelope, photographs that had finally reached him after 2 months of effort. The senior officer ordered Dion to slide the envelope across the floor and he complied. I was the one to pick it up. Inside were Polaroid photographs depicting a man who resembled Dion entering and exiting the convenience store on the night of the murder, though the facial features and build were slightly different. In one image, a corrections officer badge could be seen clipped to the man's belt, partially concealed by his jacket. As I looked at the photograph, a cold realization settled in my stomach. The senior officer instructed me to present him with the envelope, which I did. He examined the photographs, his face drained of color before everything unfolded rapidly. Dion lunged toward the senior officer, and multiple officers opened fire. Dion collapsed, and the senior officer called for medical assistance, but from my vantage point, it was evident that Dion was already dead, having bled out in less than 2 minutes. He lay there on the floor of the execution chamber, where he was supposed to meet his fate in a few weeks. The ensuing investigation was unprecedented. The photographs Dion had held were entered into evidence. The witness who had seen another man fleeing was finally interviewed, and security footage from other businesses that Haynes had robbed was scrutinized. Financial records highlighting his gambling debts were subpoenaed, and piece by piece the truth emerged. Officer Richard Haynes was responsible for the convenience store murder, having framed Dion, who had merely been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Haynes had manipulated evidence using his position in law enforcement to ensure Dion's conviction, and he had taken a position at Florence specifically to keep an eye on Dion and prevent the truth from surfacing. Yet another officer at the prison, having begun to suspect Haynes, managed to deliver those photographs to Dion. We never discovered their identity. They never came forward. Haynes was arrested at his residence the following morning and ultimately convicted, receiving a death sentence himself. He was executed at Florence in 1983, in the same chamber where Dion had perished, but by then Dion was already gone. An innocent man had been killed by corrections officers while attempting to prove his innocence. The state of Arizona issued a posthumous exoneration, but that held little consolation for Dion or his family. I remained at Florence for another 2 years after that fateful night, but I was never the same. I couldn't shake the haunting thought of how close we came to executing an innocent man through official channels. If Dion hadn't initiated that confrontation, he would have met his end in that chair, and the truth would have died alongside him. I often reflect on Kaylin. She left just 3 months after that night, unable to continue in a place where the system had so completely failed. I think about the officer who delivered those photographs to Dion, whoever they may be. They safeguarded the truth yet could not save the man. And I envisioned Dion in that execution chair, clutching the proof of his innocence, aware that even in that critical moment, survival was unlikely. He chose to risk his life to expose the truth rather than fade away in silence. I'm unsure if that makes the situation better or worse, but I still see his face when I close my eyes. I wonder how many other innocent individuals are currently confined to cells, awaiting execution for crimes they did not commit. How many other Dions exist, And will anyone believe them before it's too late? I had the pleasure of working at Casey Moore's Oyster House in Tempe, Arizona for 3 years, and anyone who has experienced a night shift there knows the tale of the woman who tragically lost her life upstairs at the hands of her heartbroken boyfriend back when it was a boarding house in 1910. This lovely old house is located at the corner of Ash Avenue and 10th Street, just a short walk from the Arizona State University campus. It features 2 stories, a charming wraparound porch and Victorian architecture that seems a bit out of place among the nearby modern apartments and college bars. The house was built in 1910 by Robert Casey and his wife Ada Moore Casey, originally welcoming travelers and workers passing through the area. Back then, Tempe was much more modest, just a little desert town with a normal school that eventually became ASU. The boarding house thrived for several years, providing rooms for miners, railroad workers, and students alike. However, in 1913, something terrible unfolded on the 2nd floor that would haunt the building forever. The story goes like this. A young woman in her 20s was renting a room there, working as a seamstress after moving to Arizona from the east to escape a controlling boyfriend. She thought she had left him behind for good, that the distance and the desert would keep her safe. But he tracked her down. One fateful night he showed up at the boarding house insisting to see her and claiming they were to be married. The owner asked him to leave, but he returned later, climbed up to the 2nd floor window and broke into her room. What happened next varies depending on who tells the story, but they all share the same tragic ending. The woman was strangled in her room and her body was discovered the next morning. Some versions claim her boyfriend ended his own life afterward. Others say he ran away and was never caught. However, everyone agrees that her spirit still haunts the boarding house, often seen in the 2nd floor windows as a pale figure in a white dress, gazing out at the street below, always waiting for someone to rescue her. When I started at Casey Moore's in 2018, I initially thought the ghost stories were just clever marketing. The restaurant plays up its haunted reputation to draw in customers, and servers like us are encouraged to share tales of paranormal happenings, glasses moving of their own accord, footsteps echoing in empty rooms, doors opening and closing as if by magic, cold spots and strange noises, the usual ghostly checklist. However, after just a few weeks of working there, I began to experience eerie happenings myself. Nothing too alarming at first, merely minor incidents I could easily brush off. A chair I pushed in would inexplicably be pulled out upon my return, silverware arranged oddly, and a nagging feeling of being watched when I was alone in the dining area. I shared my experiences with Dallin, the bar manager who had been at Casey Moore's for 15 years. He chuckled, saying it was part of the initiation. He explained that the spirit was just getting to know me, assessing whether I would be respectful or troublesome. When I asked if he truly believed in the hauntings, his smile faded. He shared chilling stories of his own encounters, hearing a woman weeping upstairs while closing up alone, glasses shattering in his hands for no apparent reason, and catching sight of her reflection in the bar mirror, only to find no one there when he turned around. I spent nearly a year at Casey Moore's before witnessing her myself. It was a slow Tuesday night in October, with mostly empty tables as I tended to my side work in the main dining room, while Daylon chatted with the only 2 customers. I needed to retrieve something from the upstairs storage area, requiring a trek up the narrow, dimly lit staircase to the 2nd floor, where the old boarding rooms remained. The upstairs is now closed to customers, mainly used for storage and office space, but the original room layout is still visible, showcasing small rooms with lofty ceilings and creaking hardwood floors. Even though I'd been up there countless times during daylight, it always felt slightly off, as if the temperature was off or the air felt stagnant. However, venturing up there at night was a whole different experience. The staircase lacked adequate lighting, and the hallway at the top was quite dark, save for a single light bulb at the far end. Upon reaching the top, I stepped into the hallway and immediately felt a chill. Not the messy cold of winter, but the biting coolness of walking into a freezer. My breath was visible. As I walked down the hallway towards the storage room, I suddenly heard it. A slow, labored breathing as if someone were struggling for air emanating from one of the old boarding rooms. I halted in my tracks as the breathing continued. Then I heard something even more disturbing, a wet, choking sound like someone drowning. I should have turned back, should have relayed what I heard to Dalon, but something compelled me forward. The door to the room stood closed yet unlatched. I slowly pushed it open, feeling the temperature drop even more. The room was bare, devoid of furniture, boxes, or anything but bare walls and floorboards. However, the breathing and choking grew louder, originating from the corner of the room near the window, and then I caught a glimpse of her, not vividly, more like an outline. A silhouette darker than the surrounding shadows. The form of a woman kneeling on the floor, hands at her throat, her head tilted back as if trying to scream, but unable to produce a sound. I stood frozen for what seemed like 5 seconds, and then the figure slumped forward and vanished. The sound ceased and the temperature returned to normal. I remained in that empty room trying to convince myself it was merely an illusion, but deep down I knew it wasn't. Returning downstairs, I recounted my experience to Dalon, who merely nodded in understanding. He said she shows herself to people sometimes, replaying her demise, ensuring her story is not forgotten. A few months later, we welcomed a new server, Kendricks, a college student at ASU working part-time to cover rent and expenses. Initially skeptical about the ghost stories, just as I had been, he dismissed them as nonsense aimed at impressing tourists. However, Kendrick started to experience some more intense happenings almost immediately. Objects would fly off shelves as he passed. Lights would flicker like crazy when he entered a room. Doors would slam shut before him, and he began to see her everywhere, not just upstairs in the old boarding rooms, but at the bottom of the stairs. Behind the bar and the walk-in cooler, always the same figure. A woman in a white dress with dark hair, hands at her throat, face pale and desperate. Kendricks became increasingly fascinated, eager to uncover the history of the building by digging into old newspapers and county records. He was determined to discover her identity. Most accounts didn't mention her name, merely presenting a generic story of a murdered boarding house resident. However, Kendricks uncovered her name. Elizabeth Harmon, a 23-year-old originally from Pennsylvania. The man who ended her life was named Thomas Ridley, a railroad worker who had followed her from Pittsburgh after she broke off their engagement. Ridley faced questioning by local authorities, but was never arrested and vanished from the area within a week after her murder. Kendricks grew convinced that Elizabeth wanted to communicate something, and that her seemingly random activity was a deliberate endeavor to gain attention. He began staying late after his shifts, hoping to make contact in the upstairs rooms. Dalon and I cautioned him against it, warning he might invite something he couldn't control. But Kendricks was resolute, insisting that Elizabeth deserved justice and needed someone to help her find peace. 2 weeks after discovering her name, the paranormal activity escalated dramatically. Each night Kendricks worked, objects would move fiercely, glasses shattered, and Elizabeth's figure appeared multiple times throughout his shifts. She would always be seen pointing, standing in various spots throughout the building, yet focusing on the same wall on the second floor, in what used to be her room. Kendricks became convinced there was something hidden in that wall, something Elizabeth wanted uncovered. He persuaded Dalon to allow him to open the wall during scheduled renovations, as the restaurant was planning to update some upstairs rooms. Dalon agreed, but only on the condition that Kendricks would bear the costs of any repairs if they found nothing. On a Monday afternoon when the restaurant was closed, Kendricks broke through the old plaster, revealing the space between the wall studs. Initially, we found nothing, just empty space and insulation. But as Kendricks reached deeper, he extracted a rusted and dented metal box measuring about 8 inches long and 4 inches wide. We gathered around the bar as he pried it open. Inside we discovered old letters, love letters from Thomas Ridley to Elizabeth Harmon, dated between 1898 and 1912. At the bottom of the box was a folded piece of paper, noticeably newer and clearer than the rest. Kendricks carefully unfolded it, and together we read the confession written by Thomas Ridley, dated October 1913, just days after Elizabeth's murder. In the letter, Ridley admitted to killing Elizabeth, recounting how he climbed through her window, confronted her about their broken engagement, and strangled her when she rejected him. He wrote that he was leaving Arizona and would never return, feeling confident he wouldn't be caught, but shame weighed heavily on him for what he had done. The letter concluded with a plea. He asked whoever found it to ensure Elizabeth was remembered, to make it known that her death was not just an accident or random violence, but a murder committed by someone who claimed to love her. We shared the confession with the Tempe Police Department, but they could do little, given that the murder was over a century old and everyone involved had long since passed. Still, the confession was added to the historical record, and we made copies to display at the restaurant as part of the building's history. Elizabeth Harmon's story transformed from a vague ghost tale into something documented and real. Most importantly, it was finally shared. After we found and displayed the confession, the paranormal occurrences at Casey Moore's shifted. While they didn't stop entirely, they became gentler, less intrusive. Staff still reported sightings of Elizabeth's figure in the upstairs windows, but she appeared more serene now, simply standing and gazing outwards. Doors would still occasionally open and close on their own, and cold spots and odd sounds persisted, yet the atmosphere felt different. It seemed she wasn't trying to get our attention anymore. Kendricks left his position at the restaurant about a month after we found the confession, claiming he accomplished what he needed to, and lingering there reminded him too much of the intensity of those weeks when Elizabeth was reaching out. I understood where he was coming from. 6 months later, I graduated and moved to California for a new job, but Elizabeth still crosses my mind from time to time. I often reflect on how she spent over a century trying to share her story, ensuring that people knew the truth of what happened to her. It makes me ponder how many other victims remain out there, forgotten or overlooked, still striving to be heard and waiting for someone to finally listen. In 2015, I, along with 3 friends, made the decision to explore the abandoned Vulture gold mine near Wickenburg, Arizona. By the end of that harrowing day, only 2 of us had survived. Wickenburg, a small town located about 70 miles northwest of Phoenix, is known for its dude ranches and its links to the wild. West, the Vulture mine opened its doors in 1863, when prospector Henry Wickenburg discovered one of the richest gold deposits in the Arizona Territory. Over the subsequent 80 years, the mine yielded nearly 340,000 ounces of gold and an equivalent amount of silver, establishing it as one of the most profitable mining operations in the Southwest. However, the Vulture mine also harbors a troubling history. During its years of operation, at least 18 men were hanged from a large ironwood tree near the main shaft, accused of high grading, which refers to stealing ore from the mine. This tree has since become known as the hanging tree. It still stands today, twisted, dead, a haunting reminder of frontier justice and the violence that characterized the Old West. The mine shut down permanently in 1942, and has since become one of Arizona's most infamous abandoned sites, drawing urban explorers, paranormal investigators, and thrill-seekers alike, much like us. There were 4 of us that day: me, my best friend Jacine, and 2 college friends, Indiana and Talon. For about 2 years, we had delved into exploring abandoned buildings and ghost towns across Arizona, capturing our experiences with cameras and drones. The Vulture mine had been on our wish list for months, but we kept delaying our visit because Talon had become increasingly fixated on it. He would talk about the mine nonstop, researching its history, studying old tunnel maps, and reading accounts from miners about rich veins of gold that were rumored to remain untapped. He was convinced that gold was still hidden within the Vulture mine, concealed in collapsed tunnels or sealed chambers abandoned when the mine closed. Initially, Jacine and Indiana found his enthusiasm amusing, affectionately dubbing him our little prospector. playfully suggesting he was destined to strike it rich. But I noticed that Talon wasn't joking. He was serious, almost obsessed. His eyes would flicker with intensity whenever he discussed the mine, and he became defensive if anyone questioned his theories. Looking back, I wish I had recognized the warning signs. I wish I had refused to join him, but I went along with the group. We arrived at the Vulture Mine on a Saturday morning in late October. Although technically private property, the fences were old and riddled with gaps, and the owners had long since stopped enforcing access restrictions. Signs warning visitors of the dangers, unstable mine shafts, and the fatalities that had occurred were scattered throughout. We had encountered similar warnings at every abandoned mine we explored, and thankfully we had never faced serious issues before. We parked about half a mile away and hiked in with backpacks filled with water, flashlights, rope, and basic first aid supplies. The Vulture Mine site sprawled across several acres of desert hillside, featuring numerous buildings in varying stages of collapse, rusted machinery half buried in sand, and at least 15 different mine shafts entering the hillside at various elevations. While the main shaft was sealed with a metal gate, many smaller exploration tunnels remained accessible if you were willing to squeeze through narrow openings or navigate unstable slopes. For the first hour, we wandered the surface, capturing photographs of the structures and the hanging tree. The tree, massive and barren, reached skyward with its skeletal branches. Its trunk was etched with hundreds of initials left by visitors over the years. Talon spent a considerable time standing beneath that tree, gazing up at the branch where nooses had once hung. He claimed to feel the presence of the men who perished there, convinced that their anger lingered in the wood. Around noon, we agreed to explore one of the smaller tunnels on the eastern side of the site. It wasn't too deep, approximately 50 feet into the hillside, and the ceiling appeared relatively stable. As we entered single file, our flashlights illuminated the uneven floor. The air cooled immediately as we moved away from the entrance, filled with the sense of dust, mineral deposits, and something organic that had long since decayed. About 30 feet in, the tunnel diverged into two passages. Indiana suggested we explore the left branch, but Talon insisted we venture right, claiming his research indicated that it led to an area where high-grade ore had been found in the 1890s. His confidence swayed us to follow. As we progressed, the right branch narrowed, forcing us to walk hunched over. Then Jacine, who was behind me, directed her flashlight at the ground and pointed out fresh boot prints in the dust, footprints that didn't belong to any of us. Someone had recently traversed this tunnel. Talon dismissed it as another explorer and urged us to continue. But those footprints only ventured deeper into the tunnel. They didn't lead back out. About 20 feet further in, we encountered camping gear, a sleeping bag, empty water bottles, granola bar wrappers. Someone had been living in the mine. Indiana wanted to leave at once, and Jacine agreed. Yet Talon insisted we had come too far to turn back now. We should at least see where the tunnel led. His agitation grew, his defensiveness palpable. I proposed a compromise. We would quickly check out the tunnel's end and then return to the surface. Everyone reluctantly agreed. We moved forward into a larger chamber, roughly 15 feet across. The walls bore old tool marks from miners who had chipped away at the rock. In the corner, there was more evidence of habitation: a lantern, a pile of rags that might have been clothing, and a pickaxe leaning against the wall, its wooden handle worn smooth from use. Talon picked up the pickaxe and tested its weight before examining the chamber walls, his hand gliding over the rock as he muttered about quartz veins and promising formations. Indiana nervously laughed, noting that Talon was starting to unsettle him. Talon didn't respond. He continued to move around the chamber, touching the walls, swinging the pickaxe experimentally. Then he suddenly stopped, turning to face us with an unsettling expression. His eyes were wide and his mouth twisted into a grin that felt off. He claimed the mine had shared something with him, telling him that the gold needed protection from thieves. What happened next unfolded rapidly. Talon raised the pickaxe and swung it at Indiana, who attempted to dodge but found nowhere to escape in the narrow tunnel. The pickaxe struck him in the shoulder and I heard the sickening crack of bone. Indiana screamed and collapsed against the wall. Jacine and I fled, racing back through the tunnel toward the entrance with our flashlights flickering wildly, our feet slipping on loose rocks. Behind us, I could hear Talon shouting about high graders and thieves at the hanging tree. I heard Indiana's cries for help and then silence. We burst into the blinding sunlight at the tunnel entrance and kept running toward where our car was parked. Halfway there, Jacine seized my arm, insisting we couldn't abandon Indiana. We had to return and help him. I knew she was right, but I also knew Talon had lost his grip on reality and might kill us if we ventured back into that tunnel. We crouched behind a collapsed building, attempting to call 911, but there was no cell reception. The vulture mine was far too remote. We waited for 20 minutes in hiding, listening for any sounds from the mine. Finally, Talon emerged from the tunnel entrance, covered in blood and still clutching the pickaxe. He stood there in the sunlight for a moment before walking toward the hanging tree. Jacine whispered for us to reach the car while he was distracted. We ran. Reaching the car, my hands shook so violently that I fumbled with the keys, struggling to insert them into the ignition. We sped away, bouncing over dirt roads, not stopping until we hit the highway. Once we regained cell service, we called 911. The police met us in Wickenburg and we recounted everything that had occurred. They organized a search team and returned to the vulture mine with us. They discovered Indiana in the tunnel chamber. He had succumbed to his injuries, having bled out from the wounds. The pickaxe had punctured his lung. They found Talon at the hanging tree, seated at the base, covered in dried blood with the pickaxe beside him. He didn't resist when approached by the police. He simply stared at them with vacant eyes. During the psychiatric evaluation, Talon claimed he had no recollection of attacking Indiana. The last thing he remembered was entering the tunnel. Then everything went dark until he woke up under the hanging tree with police officers surrounding him. The prosecutor argued that Talon experienced a psychotic break, fueled by his obsession with finding gold, convincing himself that Indiana was trying to steal his discovery, leading him to attack in a fit of paranoid rage. The defense contended it was temporary insanity. Ultimately, Talon was convicted of manslaughter rather than murder, and received a 15-year sentence in a psychiatric facility. What troubles me is this. Talon had no history of violence, mental illness, or anything that would have predicted his actions that day. When I provided my statement to the police, I informed them about the camping gear we encountered in the tunnel, proof that someone else had been living there. They conducted a thorough search but found no trace of whoever had been residing in the mine. The sleeping bag and supplies we saw had vanished as if they had never existed. I have reflected on that day constantly over the past decade, replaying every moment in my mind, searching for missed signs and warnings I should have heeded. I keep returning to what Talon said right before he attacked Indiana, that the mine had communicated something to him, that the gold needed protection. The vulture mine has a long history of violence and death. 18 men hanged for stealing ore, countless others killed in accidents or disputes over claims. Hundreds of miners spent years underground, risking their lives and sacrificing their health, all in pursuit of gold. Such obsession leaves an indelible mark. Such violence seeps into the very rock. I am unsure if I believe in curses, haunted places, or spirits that possess the living. But I know something shifted in Talon the moment we entered that mine. Something awakened within him, or perhaps something else took control. And I am convinced that Indiana lost his life because of it. Jacine moved to Colorado 6 months after the incident, and we no longer communicate. I suspect being around me serves as a painful reminder of that day. I still reside in Arizona, but I will never return to Wickenburg. I will never explore another abandoned mine, because I learned that some places should remain undisturbed, some doors should remain locked, and some obsessions, once ignited, can never be satisfied. The gold still lies within the vulture mine. Estimates suggest millions of dollars worth, locked away in collapsed tunnels and sealed chambers. But it's not worth dying for. Not worth killing for, and certainly not worth losing your sanity over. I genuinely hope Talon finds peace one day. I hope he can remember what transpired so he can comprehend and process it. Yet a part of me worries it might be better if he never recalls it. Because what if what he told us was true? What if the mind truly spoke to him? What would it have said? I want to share something incredibly difficult. My best friend Jalin went missing on Route 66 near the abandoned town of Two Guns in March 2021. The police labeled it a missing person case, but deep down, I believe something sinister took her. Two Guns, located in Coconino County about 30 miles east of Flagstaff, has a tragic history dating back to the late 1800s. In 1878, a group of Navajo warriors attacked a camp of Apache who were sheltered in a cave system by the canyon. They sealed the entrance and set fires, resulting in the suffocation and burning of those inside. Estimates suggest that between 40 and 60 Apache lives were lost that day, their bodies left in darkness. Years later, in the 1920s, an entrepreneur named Harry Miller built a tourist attraction over the massacre site, exploiting its horrific past. He opened the cave, showcased the remains of the Apache, and charged visitors to gawk at human remains, dubbing it the Mystery Cave. During the 20s and 30s, travelers would stop by Two Guns to see the Death Cave, refuel, and buy souvenirs made from bones. The curse of Two Guns is well documented. Nothing has succeeded there. Harry Miller's venture crumbled within years, and subsequent businesses suffered devastating losses, including fires and fatalities. The town was finally abandoned in the 1970s, leaving behind decaying buildings and remnants of a dark past. While you can still pull off Route 66 to explore the ruins, locals advise against it, warning of the curse that befalls anyone who disturbs the site. They're right to be cautious. Jalin and I had been inseparable since middle school, sharing a passion for abandoned places and forgotten stories. By our mid-20s, we had explored numerous ghost towns and historical sites across Arizona and New Mexico. Jalin was the researcher, dedicating weeks to studying locations before our visits while I captured everything through photos. We dreamt of publishing a book on Arizona's abandoned places, combining history with visuals. Two Guns was on our list for years, but I hesitated, aware of the curse surrounding it. Jalin dismissed it as mere superstition, believing the failures were due to chance and misguided ventures. She insisted our intention was to document, not exploit, and that would make us different. I regret not arguing more forcefully. I wish I had refused to go. We embarked on our journey from Flagstaff on a chilly Saturday morning in early March, taking Interstate 40 toward Winslow, then veering off to the old Route 66 access road, which parallels the interstate. The ruins were visible from the highway, a haunting sight of collapsed structures at the canyon's edge. We parked and ventured out, even though the site was technically private property. While the signs warned of dangerous structures and risk, we brushed them off as we had done many times before. The main ruins included an old gas station, a partially standing trading post, and rusting remains of zoo cages. At the end of the site, concealed behind a chain-link fence adorned with warnings, lay the cave, the infamous Death Cave. Jalin expressed her desire to see it, but I hesitated, voicing my concerns about its dangers. Despite my reservations, she urged me to accompany her for just a quick look. We approached the cave entrance, an opening in the canyon wall, ignoring the faded warnings. Once inside, the temperature dropped sharply, and the cave was more expansive than I anticipated. The ground was uneven, littered with rocks, debris, and bones, human remains that had never been properly laid to rest. Jalin began documenting the cave's layout, while I attempted to capture the grim reality of the site. After about 15 minutes, Jalin noticed a narrow passage diverging from the main chamber, eager to explore it. I urged her to turn back, sensing we had seen enough, but she pressed on and I followed, not wanting to leave her alone. The passage was cramped, leading us back about 30 feet before opening into a smaller chamber which felt unsettling. The air was colder, the darkness oppressive, and a foul stench lingered, making me uneasy. Jalen stood in the center, fascinated by pictographs on the walls, but I couldn't stop watching her. Her expression had shifted to something distant and vacant. I called out to her, but she didn't respond. When I touched her shoulder, she recoiled as if I had shocked her. Then she turned to me, her eyes vacant, as if she were staring through me, and whispered words in an unfamiliar language. Panic surged within me, and I urged her to leave immediately. She initially resisted, but eventually followed me back to the main cave. Once there, she seemed to return to herself, confused about why I was so distressed and insisting she was fine. When I recounted her strange behavior, she expressed no recollection of it, only remembering our entry into the smaller chamber. We quickly left the cave, and I felt a wave of relief upon stepping into the sunlight. However, Jalen appeared unfazed, claiming I was overreacting and suggesting we continue exploring the ruins. I firmly refused, which led to a heated argument, the worst we had ever had. In frustration, Jalen said she would explore alone while I waited by the car if I was too scared. I chose to stay back, watching her navigate the ruins with her camera. Time passed, and I grew increasingly anxious as I lost sight of her. After 30 minutes, I called her name, but there was no answer. When I retraced my steps, I found her camera abandoned near the old trading post's foundation, but Jalen was nowhere to be found. I searched for an hour, calling her name and checking every structure, but there were no signs of her. I called 911, and search and rescue teams arrived within 2 hours. They searched tirelessly for 2 weeks, employing dogs, helicopters, and ground-penetrating radar, scouring the cave system, canyon, and desert, but found nothing. No trace of Jalen, no footprints, no signs of struggle. She had simply vanished. The police interviewed me multiple times, pressing about our argument and whether I had harmed her. I assured them I hadn't. They speculated whether she wandered off and got lost, but I knew her experience wouldn't allow that. Eventually, they categorized it as a missing person case, and the active search was called off, leaving me devastated. I returned to Two Guns 3 times following her disappearance, always during the day and remaining outside the ruins, desperate for any clue about what happened. On my third visit, I transferred the photographs from Jalen's damaged camera. Most were ordinary images of the ruins, but the last 6 photographs were unsettling, taken inside that small chamber where Jalen had zoned out. They displayed walls adorned with pictographs, yet in each photo, something dark and indistinct lingered in the shadows, drawing closer in every successive image. The first photo showed it far away, but by the last it was positioned right behind where Jalen had stood. Moreover, it seemed the final image had been taken from ground level, as if the camera had been dropped. The timestamps showed they were captured in under 2 minutes, the same moment she had been unresponsive. I shared the photographs with the police, who dismissed them as mere shadows and light tricks, insisting there was no evidence of foul play. Paranormal investigators, however, perceived a different story. They described the cave as a site of extreme negative energy, claiming the massacre had left an unhealed spiritual wound. They warned that Jalen had disturbed something that should have remained undisturbed, suggesting that whatever lurked in that cave might have taken her. Now I find myself lost in uncertainty. I don't know if Jalen is gone forever or if she lingers somewhere unreachable. I can't tell if she was taken by some supernatural force or if she simply succumbed to the wilderness, with her body lost to the desert. However, I believe the curse of Two Guns is real. This place is tainted by its violent past, and I vow never to return. The ruins and the cave remain, alongside whatever took Jalen, lying in wait for the next person who disregards the warnings and ventures too deep into a site that should have been left undisturbed. Over the last century and a half, Two Guns has claimed countless lives. Business owners, tourists, workers, explorers, and now Jalen. I hope she finds peace, but I fear she hasn't. For places like Two Guns only offer darkness, and once that darkness touches you, it never lets go. 20 years ago, my older brother and I found ourselves working landscaping jobs in northern Arizona. At that time, we were both in our early 20s, trying to save money and navigate what we wanted out of life. After our shifts ended around 7 p.m., we established a routine. We would drive about 20 minutes into the desert on dirt roads north of Flagstaff, to a secluded spot we had discovered nestled between two low hills. It was a private retreat, a space where we could unwind from the day, smoke a little, and simply be away from the hustle and bustle of civilization. We visited this spot 2 or 3 times each week for nearly 4 months. We knew the route, the landmarks, and the sounds that filled the desert at night. It felt like a safe haven, something familiar and comforting. Yet one night in late August, everything shifted. We never returned to that place after that night, and neither of us set foot in the northern Arizona desert again. Our drive typically took about 40 minutes on rough dirt roads, which became increasingly bumpy as we ventured further from the highway. My brother always took the wheel since I didn't trust my own driving on those washboard roads in the dark. We would leave town around 7:30 just as the sun began to set, arriving at our spot right as full darkness enveloped the area. The location was ideal, a flat expanse about 50 feet across, hidden between 2 hills standing around 30 feet tall. The hills shielded us from anyone passing by on distant roads, and there was a large flat rock that served as a perfect bench. Surrounding us was the classic high-elevation Arizona landscape, with ponderosa pines mingling with juniper trees and rocky soil dotted with bunch grass and small shrubs. The air was always cool at night, often dipping into the 50s even in summer. The desert at night was alive with sound, coyotes howling, owls calling to one another, small creatures rustling through the underbrush, insects buzzing, and the wind whispering through the pines. It was never silent until that night. We arrived at our spot around 8:15 p.m., greeted by the deep blue-black sky unique to the desert, far from city lights, with stars already twinkling above. My brother parked the truck in our usual spot, facing the direction we had come from for a quick getaway if needed. As we got out and walked to the flat rock, everything felt perfectly normal. The temperature was pleasant and the soothing sounds of the desert enveloped us. My brother began to roll a joint while I sat beside him, gazing at the stars, and we talked about work and the possibility of moving to Phoenix for better opportunities. A typical conversation on a typical evening. Then at exactly 8:32 p.m. everything changed. I remember the time because I glanced at my watch. The noise ceased abruptly, as if someone had flipped a switch to mute the entire desert. The coyotes stopped mid-howling, the insects went silent, and the wind ceased rustling through the trees. We were enveloped in complete silence, a profound stillness that felt almost tangible, amplifying the sound of our own heartbeat and breathing. My brother stopped what he was doing and looked up, his expression puzzled under the moonlight. He asked if I heard that, but his voice sounded odd, devoid of life, as if the air swallowed the sound before it could reach me. I nodded in agreement. We stood from the rock, scanning our surroundings. Everything was motionless. The trees remained still despite having felt a steady breeze only seconds before. Then I heard it, a high-pitched tone that didn't belong, akin to tinnitus but external, emanating from all directions and none at all. It wasn't loud, but it was invasive, drilling into my skull and causing my teeth to ache. My brother heard it too, quickly covering his ears, though it offered no relief. The sound felt as if it was penetrating our minds rather than coming through our ears. Suddenly, my brother grabbed my arm with a grip so tight it was painful, his fingers digging into my skin. He was staring at the top of the hill to our left, the one about 30 feet high. At first I didn't see anything, only the dark silhouette of the hill against the slightly lighter sky. But my brother was frozen, his entire body tense, his breathing quickening. I asked him what he saw, but he didn't respond. Instead, he pulled me toward the truck and we moved quickly, not quite running, but close. He kept glancing over his shoulder at the hill while I repeatedly asked him what was wrong. He wouldn't answer, just continued urging me toward the truck. Once inside, he started the engine, and I had never seen him drive so recklessly. He sped off, the truck bouncing and sliding on the rough dirt road, kicking up clouds of dust. I held onto the door handle with one hand and braced myself against the dashboard with the other, convinced we would either flip over or crash into a tree. The high-pitched sound faded as we distanced ourselves from that spot, and after about 2 miles the familiar desert sounds returned. Coyotes howling, insects buzzing, wind rustling like nothing had occurred. My brother didn't slow down until we reached the paved highway, and even then he was driving 20 miles over the speed limit all the way back to Flagstaff. I kept asking him what happened, what he saw on that hill, but he remained silent, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that they turned white, his jaw clenched. When we returned to our apartment around 9:30 p.m., my brother went straight to his room and closed the door. I sat in the living room trying to process what had just transpired, struggling to understand why we had left so abruptly. Around midnight I knocked on his door and he invited me in. He was sitting on his bed with all the lights on, looking pale and shaken in a way I had never witnessed before. I sat beside him and insisted he tell me what he saw. He remained quiet for a long while, then began to speak. He said when the silence enveloped us, he felt an overwhelming sensation that something was watching us. It was the same instinct one experiences when alone in the woods, suddenly aware of a predator's presence nearby, a primal instinct buried deep within our DNA. Then he saw it atop the hill, standing completely still and watching us. He described it as massive, at least 9 feet tall, maybe taller. Its body shape was humanoid but felt fundamentally wrong. Its proportions were off, with arms that were too long and a head that was too large. It loomed there in silhouette against the sky, observing us. He felt an absolute certainty that if we didn't leave immediately, something terrible would occur. He sensed its focus on us, heavy and malicious, as if it were deliberating whether to come down from that hill. I asked if he thought it was a person, and he looked at me as if I were insane. He insisted no person is 9 feet tall. No person can silence the entire desert simply by being present. No one radiates that kind of wrongness. I inquired if it could be a bear standing on its hind legs, but he shook his head, adamant that this was not a bear. The shape was wrong, the way it stood was wrong, everything about it was wrong. I suggested it could be a trick of the light, shadows creating an illusion, but he dismissed that, stating he had looked at it for at least 10 seconds, long enough to be sure of what he was seeing. Long enough to see it shift its weight slightly, affirming it wasn't just a tree or rock formation, long enough to observe it turn its head, following our movements as we backed towards the truck. I was at a loss for words. My brother isn't someone who easily frightens. He's practical, skeptical, and level-headed, but that night he was truly terrified, and his fear transmitted to me. If he could be so shaken, it must have been real. We didn't sleep that night. We stayed up trying to understand what had happened. The next morning, my brother expressed a desire to return during daylight to see if we could find any evidence. I thought it was a terrible idea but agreed to accompany him, not wanting him to go alone. We drove out around noon, but in the light of day the place looked completely ordinary. Just another stretch of desert between 2 hills. We walked around searching for footprints or tracks or anything that could explain what my brother had seen, and we found them. Atop the hill where the figure had stood were impressions in the dirt. They weren't human footprints or any animal prints I recognized. They were elongated, roughly foot-shaped, measuring at least 18 inches long and 6 inches wide at the widest point, deeply pressed into the hard-packed dirt, indicating whatever had made them was extraordinarily heavy. There were only 3 prints, as if whatever it was had taken 3 steps to the edge of the hill and then halted. The distance between the prints was over 6 feet. No human has a stride that long. We took pictures with my brother's camera and then left, resolute not to return to that spot ever again. In fact, we avoided any isolated area in the desert. Within a month, my brother moved to California, expressing that he couldn't stay in Arizona any longer. He confessed that every time he gazed at the mountains or the trees, he wondered if that thing was out there watching him. I remained in Flagstaff for another year, yet I never felt at ease in the desert again. I delved into research about what we might have encountered, Discovering Tales of the Mogollon Monster, Arizona's version of Bigfoot, a creature said to inhabit the pine forests along the Mogollon Rim. The descriptions fit what my brother saw. 7 to 9 feet tall, humanoid but with incorrect proportions, covered in dark hair. However, my brother never mentioned hair. He only described the silhouette, the shape. None of the Mogollon monster stories spoke of the silence we experienced before the sighting. That felt distinctly different, something more sinister. I spoke to several individuals in forestry and wildlife management, inquiring if there were known animals that could provoke such a reaction in local wildlife. They responded with certainty that there were none. They explained that the desert only falls completely silent moments before a major predator, like a mountain lion or bear, appears, and even then, only the immediate area goes quiet, not the entire landscape for miles. What we experienced was not natural. I do not know what it was, whether it was a cryptid, something supernatural, or an undiscovered phenomenon in science. But I know it was real. I know my brother saw it. I know it was watching us, and I know we escaped just in time. Occasionally I still dream about that night. The silence, the high-pitched tone, and the sensation of being observed by something that shouldn't exist. I can't help but wonder how many others have encountered it. How many people have faced that being in the northern Arizona desert, either perishing without a tale to tell or surviving, but choosing never to disclose their experience. The desert is vast, empty, and full of hiding places for things unseen. Just because we cannot see them does not mean they are not there. During the winter break of my freshman year at Northern Arizona University, I ended up staying on campus because heading home to Yuma just wasn't an option. My family had relocated to Texas over the summer, and I couldn't afford a plane ticket back. In hindsight, that was a huge mistake. I should have thought twice about spending the break alone in Morton Hall. Northern Arizona University is perched at 7,000 feet in Flagstaff, surrounded by the largest ponderosa pine forest in North America. The campus is stunning, featuring historic buildings that date back to when it was known as Arizona State Teachers College in the early 1900s. Morton Hall, which opened in 1927 as a women's dormitory, has seen nearly a century of female students pass through its aging rooms and narrow hallways. There's a lot of character in the building. High ceilings, hardwood floors, that clanging and hissing radiator heating that goes all night, and windows that don't quite seal, letting in drafts during winter. But Morton Hall also has a darker side, and everyone there knows about Kathy. The story goes like this. Back in the early 1950s, a freshman named Kathy lived there. She was from a small town in southern Arizona, the first in her family to attend college, and her boyfriend was serving in the Korean War. During Christmas break of her first year, she received tragic news. Her boyfriend had been killed in action, and her family could no longer pay for her education, forcing her to drop out. Alone in Morton Hall over break, one of just a few students still around, Kathy tragically hanged herself in the stairwell between the second and third floors on New Year's Eve, 1952. It wasn't until January 2nd, when other students started returning, that her body was discovered. Ever since that day, it's said Kathy's spirit has lingered in Morton Hall. Students report seeing her in that same stairwell, hearing cries from vacant rooms and feeling a heavy sadness in certain spots, especially on the second floor where her room was. The haunting seems to intensify during winter break, the anniversary of her death when the building is mostly empty, leaving the few remaining students alone with whatever presence still roams those halls. I moved into Morton Hall in August 2019, and my room was a small single on the third floor, barely big enough for a twin bed, a desk, and a dresser. The building wasn't just old. It had charm, and I loved its history. My RA, Tylen, a junior who'd lived there for 2 years, introduced herself at our first floor meeting and shared the story of Kathy. She didn't frame it as a warning, but more of an interesting ghost tale for the newcomers, mentioning that some people experienced odd things while others didn't. She reassured us, If we respected Kathy, she'd leave us alone. I believed her. The first semester, everything seemed normal. Morton Hall felt like any other vintage dorm, creaky, cold, and filled with the usual sounds of student life. But as winter break approached, things took a turn. I was among 5 students who stayed in Morton Hall while it could accommodate 200. Being one of just 5 in that vast emptiness felt wrong from the outset. The first few days were okay. It was quiet, a nice change from the usual dorm chaos. I focused on studying for the next semester, watched movies on my laptop, and made trips to the dining hall, which was still open for those of us on campus. But by December 23rd, things started to get weird. One night around 10 o'clock, my TV turned on by itself, flickering to life without any input from me. I was across the room and my remote was on the nightstand. I turned it off, went back to studying, and an hour later it switched on again. This time I unplugged it. The next morning I woke up to find my poster on the floor. Not torn or damaged, just lying there as if someone had carefully taken it down. I hung it back up, but that afternoon it fell again. I tried to convince myself that the old plaster walls weren't holding the thumbtacks properly, but I knew that wasn't the case. Those tacks were firmly in the wall. Something was definitely taking down my poster. On Christmas Eve, I visited a fellow student named Indiana, who I'd met in the dining hall. Her room was far from the stairwell. We were watching a movie when we heard footsteps in the hallway, slow and deliberate, moving from one end to the other. We muted the movie and listened. The footsteps passed by Indiana's door and continued down the hall. We exchanged glances. Indiana suggested it might be one of the other students, but with just 5 of us in the entire building, we knew where everyone was, and those footsteps were coming from the wrong end where all the rooms were empty. We opened the door to check, and the hallway was empty, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead illuminating every corner, but we could still hear the footsteps. They reached the end of the hall and turned into the stairwell, and we heard them ascend. Indiana suggested we follow, but I thought that was a bad idea. Still, she was already heading toward the stairs, and I didn't want to be left behind. We climbed the stairwell and paused. The footsteps had stopped. The stairwell was silent until we heard a labored breathing from above us, right from the landing between the 2nd and 3rd floors, the very spot where Kathy had died. Indiana began to step up the stairs, and I followed closely behind because I didn't want to be alone. When we reached the landing, the temperature had dropped significantly, at least 20 degrees. I could see my breath, and then I saw her. It wasn't clear, not like seeing a living being, but a dark shape hovering in the air where someone would hang from a rope. The outline of a woman with her head at an odd angle, feet just inches off the ground. She was there for a brief moment, maybe 3 seconds, then vanished. The temperature returned to normal, and the breathing ceased. We bolted back to Indiana's room and locked the door, not leaving until morning. Christmas Day was eerily quiet, almost too quiet. I stayed in my room all day and didn't hear anything unusual. But that night things escalated again. I was in bed trying to sleep when I felt my blankets being pulled off me. Slowly, gently, as if someone was carefully taking them away. I yanked them back and the pulling ceased. I tried to drift off again, but 10 minutes later it happened again. This time I flicked on my light and sat up. My room appeared empty, but I felt this presence, that unmistakable feeling of being watched by something invisible. I got out of bed, switched on every light, and even pushed my desk chair against the door despite it being locked, then sat on my bed with my back against the wall, staring at the door until dawn arrived. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning I noticed scratch marks on my door, 3 parallel lines etched into the wood from the inside, like someone had dragged their nails down the surface. The marks weren't there the night before. I'd have noticed that. I found Taylin, the only RA on duty during break, and told her everything. The TV flicking on, the poster, the footsteps, that figure in the stairwell, the blankets being pulled, and the scratches. She didn't seem surprised at all. She said things always got crazier during winter break. Kathy, she told me, was busiest in the days leading up to the anniversary of her death. Talon offered to let me move to another room, maybe downstairs where she was. I agreed, and we relocated my things that afternoon. My new room was smaller and darker, but felt safer being on the first floor. That night, December 26th, all 5 of us in Morton Hall had strange experiences. Indiana texted me at 2 a.m., saying someone was banging on her door, but when she peeked through the peephole, no one was there. Another student heard crying coming from the walls, and Tylen said her doorknob had been turning back and forth for 10 minutes straight, even though her door was locked and no one was in the hallway. Meanwhile, I woke up to find someone standing at the foot of my bed. A woman in a white nightgown with long dark hair covering her face. She stood there, silent and still. I couldn't scream or move. I just lay there, frozen, staring at her. Then she lifted her head and I saw her face, or what should have been her face. It was just darkness where her features should be. She reached toward me with one hand, and that's when I finally found my voice. I screamed. The figure vanished and Tylen burst in, flipping on the lights and asking what happened. I could barely get the words out, only pointing to where she had stood. Talon assured me we needed to leave Morton Hall. She said the activity had never been this intense before. The next morning, December 27th, all 5 of us packed up and left, staying in a hotel in downtown Flagstaff for the rest of winter break, sharing rooms and splitting costs. We didn't return to Morton Hall until other students were back for the spring semester. When I got back to my 3rd floor room on January 15th, everything looked fine. But my poster, the one that kept falling, was on the floor again. And there was something new, writing on my mirror that looked like it was done with condensation, like when a bathroom mirror fogs up. 3 words. "Stay away, Kathy." I snapped a picture and showed it to Talon, but she had no explanation. That same day, I requested a room transfer, and by the end of January, the university moved me to a different dorm. I never set foot in Morton Hall again, though Indiana chose to stay. She said she got used to the hauntings and they didn't bother her anymore. 2 weeks into the spring semester, she knocked on my door at the new dorm, saying she needed to tell me something. On New Year's Eve, the anniversary of Kathy's death, she'd been alone in her room when she heard a knock at her door. When she opened it, she found a note slid underneath, written in old-fashioned handwriting on yellowed paper. The note read, "Thank you for keeping me company. I'm not alone anymore." It wasn't until she dug deeper into Kathy's story that she realized what it meant. She found old newspaper articles about the suicide and uncovered details that many versions of the legend left out. Kathy hadn't been entirely alone in Morton Hall when she died. There was another student staying in the building over break, a girl from Kathy's floor who discovered her body in the stairwell. That girl's name was Indiana, just like my friend. Indiana believes Kathy was reaching out to her specifically due to the name connection, some sort of spiritual bond across the years. She mentioned that the disturbances stopped after New Year's Eve. No more footsteps, no more cries, no more apparitions in the stairwell, as if Kathy had found the closure she needed and finally moved on. I wanted to believe that, but a part of me couldn't because Morton Hall was still haunted. Other students continued to share their experiences during the spring semester. The building was just as lively as ever. Whatever happened on New Year's didn't set Kathy free. It just shifted her focus away from us, the 5 students who stayed over winter break. I eventually transferred to Arizona State University in Phoenix for my sophomore year. I couldn't bear to walk past Morton Hall without remembering the figure at the foot of my bed, the emptiness where her face should have been, the way she reached for me. Morton Hall remains in operation, still housing female students, and Kathy is still there, haunting the hallways, appearing in the stairwell every anniversary of her death, still seeking companionship in her eternal solitude. I can only hope she finds peace someday, but I'm not optimistic. Buildings like Morton Hall tend to clench onto their ghosts, and ghosts like Kathy tend to hold on tight. My family has called the Eagle Creek Valley in southeastern Arizona home for 5 generations now. While we used to share stories about the red ghost, that's a topic we've moved away from. But in 2023, I stumbled upon proof of its existence, and I can't say I was prepared for it. Eagle Creek is nestled in Graham County, close to the New Mexico border, surrounded by vast desert and mountains with not much else around. The nearest sizable town is Clifton, around 20 miles to the west. Our family has been ranching this land since 1896, raising cattle and horses across 3,000 acres of high desert grassland. We're not wealthy, but we've certainly made a name for ourselves. Our family roots run deep, intertwined with stories, many of which might have been documented by other families, but we chose to forget them intentionally. The Red Ghost is one of those tales. It was seen as folklore during my childhood, a spooky campfire story my grandfather Dion would share occasionally, usually after indulging in a bit too much whiskey. This creature was said to have roamed the Eagle Creek area in 1883, described as a massive hellfire red beast that trampled a woman to death by the creek and wrecked a prospector's camp near Clifton. It was painted as some kind of camel or demon, appearing at night, leaving behind enormous footprints and coarse red hair, always carrying a corpse on its back. Legend has it that it was spotted numerous times over several years before fading into obscurity. Most folks think it was just a stray camel from the Army's failed Camel Corps experiment in the 1850s, but our family knows better. We understood it wasn't a camel, it was something entirely different, and we were aware that my great-great-grandfather had seen it. Grandfather Dion passed away in March 2023 at the age of 96, spending his final years in the family ranch house where he was born, refusing to move to town even as his health declined. Upon his passing, I was tasked with overseeing his estate, which involved sorting through decades of belongings to decide what to keep, sell, or donate. The main house contained the typical items: furniture, photographs, and old ranch equipment. However, the barn was a different story. Growing up, I always knew the barn was off limits. Grandfather Dion had it padlocked and would scold us if we got too close. He insisted it housed dangerous equipment and chemicals, so we had no reason to be in there. After his death, I finally had a reason to unlock it. Inside, the barn was not filled with equipment but rather journals, documents, and a large wooden trunk secured with a heavy chain. I spent 2 days poring over the journals, which dated back to 1882 and belonged to my great-great-grandfather Daniel Reeves, the first of our family to settle in Eagle Creek. Most entries were typical records of weather patterns, cattle counts, fence repairs, and water sources. But once I reached the entries from October 1883, everything took a turn. Daniel wrote about hearing strange screams at night, animal noises that didn't match any creature he recognized. He noted massive tracks near the creek, gigantic cloven hoof prints twice the size of any horse or cow. He recorded the loss of cattle, which he found trampled and partially consumed, indicating a predator with grizzly bear-like strength. Then he wrote about witnessing the creature. On the night of October 21st, 1883, while inspecting his livestock, Daniel spotted something moving along the ridgeline about a quarter-mile from his property. He described it as enormous, standing at least 8 feet tall at the shoulder, with a long neck and a humped back, aglow with a red hue, not brown, not gray, but red like fresh blood in moonlight. He observed it for several minutes through his rifle scope, until it vanished behind a rock formation. However, before it disappeared, he noticed something else on its back, a shape resembling a human figure, albeit in a grotesque manner. It was slumped forward, arms dangling, head rolling with each movement of the creature beneath it. Daniel instinctively recognized it as a corpse, tied or strapped to the creature's back, either as some macabre cargo or as punishment for something the deceased had done. He chose not to investigate further, returning to his house to lock the doors and hope the creature wouldn't approach. But it did. Just 3 nights later, Daniel heard his horses crying out in the corral and stepped outside with his rifle. The beast stood 30 feet from his porch, illuminated by the full moon. Daniel detailed the creature's features: massive cloven hooves, tree trunk-like legs, and a body covered in coarse hair that glistened red in the moonlight. Its long neck led to a head that appeared wrong, too large and angular with eyes catching the light like a cat's, glowing yellow and inhuman. And on its back, secured by ropes and leather straps, was a mummified corpse of a man. The body was ancient, desiccated, and sun-bleached, its clothes disintegrated to rags. The most disturbing aspect was the position of the corpse, facing backward, its head hanging down, empty eye sockets seeming to gaze at anyone who dared follow. Daniel raised his rifle and pulled the trigger. The bullet struck the creature in the shoulder, producing a sound he described as part scream, part roar, a noise that made his bones vibrate and his ears ring. Then it charged at him. Daniel fired, repeatedly emptying his rifle, but the creature wouldn't fall. It barreled through his fence, trampled his vegetable garden, and vanished into the night. In the morning, Daniel discovered massive tracks leading away from his land, along with thick, dark blood that had an odd chemical scent, reminiscent of sulfur or copper. He also found coarse red hair that was still warm to the touch hours after the creature had escaped. After that night, Daniel's journal entries grew increasingly filled with fear. He recorded sightings of the creature in the distance over the next few months, as well as reports from other ranchers and prospectors. He noted an incident involving a woman who was trampled near Eagle Creek in November 1883, and he continued to mention the corpse on the creature's back, becoming convinced it wasn't just random cargo. He believed it was a specific individual, someone deserving of eternal punishment bound to the creature. Daniel speculated that the being wasn't natural but rather a spirit or demon tied to the land, cursed to wander forever with its burden. The final entry about the red ghost was dated April 1884. Daniel mentioned not having seen the creature in over a month, expressing hope that it had moved on. But then he added a chilling remark. "I killed it yesterday. Shot it at close range and it finally fell. I cut the corpse from its back and burned it. I took the hide as proof, hidden in the barn where no one will ever find it. May God forgive me for what I have kept." I read that passage 3 times, ensuring I understood it correctly. Daniel had killed the red ghost and hidden its hide in the barn. I glanced at the trunk in the corner and felt an unease. I knew what was inside. Although I was apprehensive about opening it, my curiosity got the better of me. The chain was rusty, though the lock remained sturdy, requiring me to cut it with bolt cutters. Upon opening the trunk, the smell overwhelmed me. Old leather, dust, and something else, something organic that had undergone decay over a century. Inside was the hide, a massive piece carefully folded and wrapped in oilcloth for preservation. Slowly I unfolded it. It stretched roughly 12 feet long and 6 feet wide, still donning coarse red hair, now rust-colored rather than blood red. This hair was unlike anything I'd ever seen, thick and wiry, resembling quills more than fur, and its shape was all wrong. The hide didn't match any known animal. The skull shape was disproportional, with holes where Daniel's bullets had hit. Ropes or straps had left deep grooves worn into the leather over time. This wasn't a camel. It bore no resemblance to any animal I could identify. I felt paralyzed. I couldn't show this to anyone without appearing utterly insane. So, I took samples, small pieces of hide and hair to send to a university lab for DNA analysis without revealing their origin. I submitted them under a false name, claiming I'd found them in my attic and wanted to identify the animal. 6 weeks later, I received the results. Unable to identify, no match to any known species, whether living or extinct. The DNA indicated characteristics from multiple species, mainly camelid and bovine, interspersed with sequences that didn't align with anything in the database. The lab technician reached out personally, suggesting the sample might be contaminated or degraded and that I should provide more material for accurate results. He shared a foreboding remark, stating that based on the cellular structure and degradation patterns, the sample appeared to be about 140 years old, aligning perfectly with when Daniel killed the creature. He concluded with the chilling advice to destroy whatever I found. When I pressed for an explanation, he cautioned that some things are better left unknown, and this was one of them. Then he hung up. I should have heeded him. I should have destroyed the hide and forgotten about it. But I didn't. I kept it, wrapped it back up, and locked it in the trunk, returning it to the barn. Then peculiar occurrences began. I started seeing something at night on the property. Something large and red, always lingering at the edge of my vision, just beyond the reach of my flashlight. Tracks reappeared. The same massive cloven hoof prints my great-great-grandfather recorded, showing up overnight, leading towards the barn, stopping as if something were returning to reclaim what had been taken. My cattle exhibited strange behavior, avoiding certain areas and huddling together at night as if protecting one another from a lurking predator. I began having recurring dreams, always the same. I would find myself standing in the desert as something big and red approached me from the darkness, its glowing yellow eyes fixated on me, and on its back was a corpse. But now I could see the face, and it was mine. I am not certain what the red ghost represents. I don't know if it's a cryptid or some unknown species that existed in the 1800s and vanished, or if it's something supernatural that simply shouldn't exist. But I am certain of its reality. I have its hide. I possess the DNA results. I hold my great-great-grandfather's journal detailing it all, and I know that it's returning, or something tied to it is coming back. I've decided to leave the ranch next month and sell the property. I can't stay here any longer, unable to sleep knowing that creature is lurking in the darkness, searching for what was taken from it. The hide will accompany me. I can't leave it behind for someone else to discover, but I also cannot bring myself to destroy it. What if destroying it worsens the situation? What if that hide is the only thing keeping whatever that creature was from making a full return? Thus I will bear this burden, just as my great-great-grandfather did. Just as the corpse on the back of the red ghost carried whatever curse tied it to that creature. We all inherit our family's transgressions. Some of us just bear them more literally than others. If you ever find yourself in southeastern Arizona near Eagle Creek and see something red moving in the distance at night, do yourself a favor. Don't investigate. Don't approach. Just leave. Because the red ghost never truly vanished. It's still out there, still waiting, and now it knows where I am.